Part 5 of Federalist 36. This should be the last part for this one. You will hear the word poll tax. They used to also call it a head tax that would be applied. The states used to have these taxes, especially the Northeast states during the time of the founding, the New England states. It would be a head tax. Every adult would be taxed a certain amount every year by the state, okay? So a head means a person, one individual. So this is paragraph 16 of Federalist number 36, and it starts actually with, as to poll taxes, I, without scruple, confess my disapprobation of them. And though they prevailed from an early period in those states which have uniformly been the most tenacious of their rights, I should lament to see them introduced into practice under the national government. He says the New England states have the poll tax, and he says, I'm really not comfortable saying this, or I wish we didn't have to, but it's possible that it would be a good idea for us to have it for the Constitution, for the federal government. But does it follow, because there is a power to lay them, that there will actually be laid? So he says, don't worry, if we have this power to use poll tax to get a tax from you, it doesn't mean that we're going to use it every time, every year. So again, because he constantly keeps on saying, we just need to have legal constitutional methods of taxation because we know emergencies come up and we don't want to not think about it. If we just count on getting the impost tax or the taxes on imports, that is not going to give enough money to the federal government to take care of your needs during an emergency. So we need these other ways of taxing. We just want to be smart about it and not overburden our people, but at the same time make sure that we have this resource available to us when it happens to be needed. So every state in the Union has power to impose taxes of this kind, and yet in several of them they are unknown in practice. Are the state governments to be stigmatized as tyrannies because they possess this power? If they are not, with what propriety can the like power justify such a charge against the national government, or even be urged as an obstacle to its adoption? As little friendly as I am to the species of imposition, I still feel a thorough conviction that the power of having recourse to it ought to exist in the federal government. So he says, as little friendly as I am to the, he says, I don't really want this poll tax. I'm not really fascinated by it, by the idea. I'm not comfortable with it, but I think when I come to think of it, it's best that we have that for federal government. We have that channel of revenue. There are certain emergencies of nations in which expedients that in the ordinary state of things ought to be forborne become essential to the public weal, and the government, from the possibilities of such emergencies, ought ever to have the option of making use of them. The real scarcity of objects in this country, which may be considered as productive sources of revenue, is a reason peculiar to itself for not abridging the discretion of the national councils in this respect. There may exist certain critical and tempestuous conjunctures of the state in which a poll tax may become an inestimable resource. Again, he's saying, let's talk about emergencies, tempestuous times, times that we are in vicissitudes. There's ups and downs in history. We don't know. Foreign invasion might happen, rebellion might happen, insurrection might happen. So he says, with that in mind, then we have to have a poll tax, or at least be able to use it. And as I know nothing to exempt this portion of the globe from the common calamities that have befallen other parts of it, I acknowledge my aversion to every project that is calculated to disarm the government of a single weapon which in any possible contingency might be usefully employed for the general defense and security. So he says, just because we are all the way here in this new continent, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have the same problems that all other countries have had throughout history. Again, he's talking about, we might have bad people that one day end up ruling us. We might have an invasion. Spanish Empire, British Empire, the French might invade us again. All these things must happen, so we have to have a channel of getting revenue for the government, of getting money for the government, for the treasury. So that's why I think a poll tax might be needed, he says. Now, the last paragraph, I have now gone through the examination of those powers proposed to be conferred upon the federal government, which relate more peculiarly to its energy and to its efficiency for answering the great and primary objects of the Union. So it says, I've talked about the issue of revenue, and I've constantly reminded you that a government needs to be authorized to do what you have asked it to do, to have energy, to have efficiency, to have vigor, to be capable of doing things. So that is one thing that he wants to say, that our first constitution does not give our Congress right now, and that's why we want this new constitution. There are others which, though omitted here, will, in order to render the view of the subject more complete, be taken notice of under the next head of our inquiries. I flatter myself the progress already made will have sufficed to satisfy the candid and judicious part of the community, that some of the objections which have been most strenuously urged against the Constitution and which were most formidable in their first appearance are not only destitute of substance, but if they had operated in the formation of the plan, would have rendered it incompetent to the great ends of public happiness and national prosperity. I equally flatter myself that a further and more critical investigation of the system will serve to recommend it still more to every sincere and disinterested advocate for good government, and will leave no doubt with men of this character of propriety and expediency of adopting it. Happy will it be for ourselves, and most honorable for human nature, if we have wisdom and virtue enough to set so glorious an example to mankind. So see here, he is saying that we are trying to be an example to the rest of the people of the world. We're going to establish the first great republic. We have to be strong. We have to make sure that we don't fall prey to all these kingdoms or these monarchies that are in charge of these empires. And the only way we can do that is if we stay united. And he says, as I have said in these last few papers, revenue is important for the treasury. The government has got to have a way of taking care of its needs. And he says, in the following papers, we will discuss more things. And what he's trying to say, as I've said, Then Madison is going to start with Federalist Paper 37 and write a few important papers back to back. And he says, just pay attention to those, and we will answer more of your questions. But that last sentence that he says, happy will it be for ourselves and most honorable for human nature if we have wisdom and virtue enough to set a glorious an example to mankind. So we want to be an example to mankind, a glorious example. And when he says virtue enough, remember a line, the previous line, it said disinterested. A disinterested person would be an honest, fair person, a virtuous person that is honest, wants to hear both sides, wants to be fair to both sides, is not interested in his or her own what's best for himself or herself only. Like right now, a disinterested person, the only person that one can come to think of it, one of the professors talks about this. Professor Wood constantly says the only disinterested person we can think of right now is a referee, somebody that is supposed to come in there, even if his favorite team is playing, he or she is supposed to be fair to both sides and not pick sides ahead of the game, ahead of the time. So we'll follow with 37 in the next video.